Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome today's program, Gaurav Saran, who is CEO of ReverseLogix. And today we're going to talk about how an RMS helps optimize e-commerce returns management. Now, over the past few years, and especially since the pandemic, companies have learned that the way we've always done things is not, going to work anymore moving forward. And this is particularly true when it comes to reverse logistics, which, I've called, over the past few years in various blog posts, the migraine headache of retail and e-commerce. So why is transforming, returns management, reverse logistics more critical today than ever before? And how can technology enable this transformation? Well, that's going to be the key focus of our conversation today. And it's great to have Gaurav on the program to share his insights and advice and perspective on this topic. So Gaurav, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Adrian. Very excited to be here, and thanks for having me on board today.
Great. Well, again, this is a very timely and important topic, especially as we're heading into, Q4 and the holiday season. I mean, I talked about kind of being a migraine headache. Well, that migraine really hurts a lot come, January, right? When everyone's returning gifts, end of December, early January timeframe. But before we kind of get into the topic, I mean, you're a first-time guest here on Talking Logistics. I'm always curious how people end up in this industry that we're in, that's now making the front page of the Wall Street Journal and mainstream newspapers and everything else. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your career path, how and why you got involved in supply chain logistics, and kind of what your role and responsibilities are there at ReverseLogix?
Absolutely. So I'm the CEO and founder for ReverseLogix. My role and responsibility is to look at product strategy, market execution, listen to customers, look at where the trends are, and overall execution of the organization in general. As far as my career path is concerned, I certainly didn't wake up and said I was going to be in returns management or reverse side of the supply chain. It was just happened as I went through my career. Early on, I was very fortunate to work with some very interesting companies here in the Bay Area, as well as some large enterprises. I started out with a company called Zoho, which is a SaaS company doing really, really well in the CRM space. That was a great experience for me because I got introduced to just the SaaS culture in general, what enterprises are looking at, and just how a market dynamic can work, how do you scale an organization, how you build the right technology. So that was a great experience right out of college for me. Then as it turns out, I started working for Microsoft. That was a phenomenal experience. Got a chance to work closely with some of their leadership at the time. Steve Ballmer, one of those influencing factors for me, as well as got exposure just randomly into supply chain, not with the view of returns, but just what supply chain was. I was working with a lot of the high-tech manufacturing customers that Microsoft had, as well as the Xbox group. So just randomly, something started to dawn on me that there's a lot of impact, first of all, on what supply chain is in general and how it runs our daily lives, for the food that you get on the table, to the shirt you're wearing, to the glasses you have on. All of those things are factor of an efficient supply chain. And over the last 2-3 decades, there's been a lot of innovation in the forward side of the supply chain. But something that started to become slightly more clear and clearer for me as the years passed by was on the reverse side of the supply chain. It was a black hole. It was like a stepchild with no innovation, everything done on Excel spreadsheets and kind of just sweep it under the rug. So that kind of got me started to look at returns in general and that problem area. And when I founded the company back in 2014, that was the premise of the organization. Now, I didn't fathom it to be where it is today in terms of just how the market is looking at returns and how much it has exploded with the Amazon-like experience, but consumers are used to returning a lot, the pandemic. So all of those factors sort of got me into returns, and over the last few years, we've matured into a very robust platform. We're fortunate enough in also being the pioneers in this space, so that's given us a lot of momentum.
Well, great. It's a common thread with all of our guests here that they never, for the vast majority of our guests, never thought about supply chain management or studied supply chain management in college and started their career in supply chain management. even myself, I'm a material science engineer, like folks that have been listening to this program know, and here I am, doing supply chain and logistics. And, I think you're right. I mean, when you think about the returns management process, it has been one of these, relatively speaking, ignored, processes. A lot of that innovation you talked about on the front end of the supply chain in terms of getting product to consumers, to customers. That's where a lot of the focus has been. And now I think, particularly because of the rise of e-commerce, obviously, and been accelerated because of the pandemic, people are recognizing that, hey, this is a weak link in our supply chain. And unless we, start driving innovation in this end of the supply chain, we're going to be, losing money, impacting customer experience, and so forth. So let's start at, I talked about this being kind of a migraine, headache of e-commerce. I mean, why is it such a headache for retailers and other companies to manage? I mean, what are the shortcomings with, some of the existing returns processes?
No, it's a massive headache, and a headache that continues to just grow, and the momentum on that has just been completely extraordinary. And there's a lot of facts around that. So, just to give you some statistics on why this is a headache in the first place. Number one is, if you just look at the volume of returns over the last few years, today a traditional e-commerce return rate, you're expecting over 30%. Think of what that means. 30% or more of your product that you thought you sold is coming back. That's massive compared to, back in the brick and mortar days, that was about an 8% return rate on the high, right? So that is big. The second piece was, or is, customer behavior. We are also used to shopping on Amazon, so that experience has become so second nature. You expect, if you want to return something, it's a right for you to be able to return it very easily and very quickly. And that also fuels an increased percent of returns. Things like bracketing these days, well, you'll buy 5 items because you want to try them for size and return 1. I'm sure we've all done something like that. So those are all very real numbers. Customer behavior, 67% of all shoppers will actually check before making a purchase whether you have a very good return policy or not. That's a massive number, customer behavior wise, right? 62% of all shoppers are likely to shop with you if they have an easy return process with you, especially if you have a buy online, return in store. Those are all very interesting numbers. So that, coupled with COVID, has also fueled a lot of the returns behavior. So that's on the customer side, where you see a massive increase in just the volume of returns that companies are getting. And to your earlier question on why has this become such a big headache, if you didn't have such a substantial increase in returns volume, you were traditionally able to sort of sweep it under the rug, where you're like, yeah, we can kind of deal with it with a point solution, which maybe gives me a portal at best, or I have an Excel spreadsheet, or I'm using my WMS system to kind of tackle the returns. But companies are realizing, look, we're in a very competitive world. And with digital transformation, the smarter companies have started to embrace returns management a lot sooner than the general trend today. So you look at some of the leaders in the market, they actually have returns as part of their corporate strategy, and generally are looking at returns. A purpose-built returns management system in RMS is now started to be thought about as a portfolio of technologies that companies need. So if you look at all of that, the 2 big things that become front and center. Number one, you want to have a very positive customer experience. By having a purpose-built returns management system, you're able to actually impact your customer satisfaction between 15 to 25%. And that is massive. You want to make sure, as especially for e-commerce brand, you are driving significant customer satisfaction. No customer is going to say, hey, you shipped the product to me nicely, but if I'm not happy with my return, you're probably going to see something on social media pretty quickly. So that impact of that negative propaganda outside can be fairly dramatic and negatively resulting for the brand. The second big piece is profitability. By having a end-to-end purpose-built returns management system, you can actually increase your profitability by up to 5%, net profitability. That's massive. And think about what that means. You bought something, if you have clear visibility on should the product even come back to you because it's beyond economical return, as an example. Should it get shipped to a different destination when someone is returning it, where you have shortages? Should it get shipped back to a store which is low on inventory? Then you're able to process the return faster, so you can put it back into inventory quickly. You're dealing with things like seasonality. Also, you're getting a lot of rich intelligence from your returns process, right? Which can drive better product in general, knowing what's wrong with the product, knowing what's coming back, when is it coming back. So there's a bunch of those factors that contribute to ultimately increases customer satisfaction on one end, and then increasing net profitability on the other. And if you look at those two parameters, they become the big differentiators at a corporate strategy level. Because a lot of the other levers, companies have really done a really good job, especially large enterprises, on really fine-tuning the other minor aspects that give them competitive differentiation. This is sort of the last frontier in my mind. If you do this really well, you can have a lot of profitability increases.
Well, yeah, there was a lot in that response, a lot to unpack there. And I think we're going to touch upon some of it, some of my, I've got some questions on some of those things, but, it's interesting because, you talked about customer experience, and, for a long time I've talked about, and I think this is it's still true, is that, we've certainly seen that delivery has become strongly linked with customer experience, right? So being able to get, on time, free delivery, receiving the product, when you were expecting it, in good condition, so on and so forth, right? So you can do everything right up to the delivery aspect, but if you get the delivery wrong, you can, completely kill the customer experience. But what you're kind of opening my eyes to is the fact that maybe isn't the last moment of truth for customer experience. It's maybe the returns, right? Because maybe you did the delivery right, and you got the product that you ordered and you got it on time and it didn't cost you anything because it was free shipping and so forth. But if for some reason you're not happy with it now, or you ordered multiple because you want to try on different sizes, now if that return process is onerous or expensive, or many other reasons, if that becomes a negative experience, then that becomes another opportunity to impact the customer experience and customer satisfaction. So maybe that is the final a moment of truth with customer experience. It's not so much the delivery, but the returns process. So that was one thing that your thoughts kind of triggered it for me. And secondly, you talked about profitability. Obviously, you're getting 30% returns. You said when it's a low percentage, you can sweep it under the rug, right? It may not get elevated, it can kind of get hidden in the P&L, right? But when it gets to be 30%, I mean, you can't hide that from the CEO and the CFO, right? That becomes very, very, very clear there. And I think that for a lot of companies, once it gets to that 30%, bracket, again, it shows up on the P&L, and it becomes very evident that, we need to start addressing this aspect of it because it's hurting us, financially. So let's talk a little bit about from a technology standpoint. I mean, you talked about spreadsheets, which is, the king of supply chain applications out there. You talked about, WMS. I mean, how have companies, that you've talked to, how are they currently managing, their reverse logistics processes? And then just to get into the returns, management system. I mean, how does an RMS fit within the existing ecosystem of IT solutions that companies have?
No, great question. So a couple things. First off, the more returns you get, meaning if you're in the upper market to enterprise space, chances are you're getting enough returns where the problem is banging down your door a lot more. So the higher the value of returns, or the higher the value of your returned goods, the bigger the problem for you. Generally, what you will see is most organizations that are in that arena of higher volume returns or higher value returns coming back, they start to look at, okay, I think I need to do something about it. And they may, a couple of years ago, the general response was, can I try to see if I can use some sort of an internal tool, or maybe look at some point solutions out there which will let someone return something. But again, those are point solutions. They actually add more complexity because they don't look at the returns challenge holistically. Most organizations will typically have three key systems that a returns management technology needs to interface with. One will be, typically your WMS system, where you're receiving the product back. Again, WMSs are not designed for returns management. And if you try to do it that way, you end up creating more complexity and actually adds to more labor and cost, which I'll talk to in a second. Second, you'll typically have some sort of a order management system where, all the orders are coming from, which they will try to utilize for the initiation experience, the front end experience, which again is not the right way to do it. Or they'll try to buy some off the shelf system, but that is so cookie cutter that it doesn't allow for the complexity of returns and looking at returns as an opportunity versus, hey, I just need to process it, right? So that lens has to be there. And third, you'll typically have a financial system in place, like an SAP or your ERP system, where you're crediting the customers back, right? So the first very important thing that most companies need to look at is, one, you need a system of authoring, not a system of record. The three systems I mentioned are generally systems of record. You want to plug in an end-to-end system of authoring that can just drop right in and play ball with those three systems very seamlessly. Also, organizations that are global in scale may have different versions of those systems. I have some customers that are running AS400 to SAP, HANA, to NetSuite, to Oracle. So, larger organizations may have a multitude of different systems. And unless you have a platform that can seamlessly plug and play with these different systems of records, you're going to create more system confusion and add more complexity. And when you go to your IT teams, they're like, whoa, we don't want anything else. We've already got 20 different systems to work with, right? So having that holistic view up front, instead of having point solutions, even within the returns journey, from initiation to processing to repairs to all of that, should be in one platform. That's the first lens. Second questions you asked me was, what should someone think about when they talk about returns management system? And there's really 5 key levers that I look at. Number one, the RMS should be able to give you some level of intelligence. And I'll give you examples of what that intelligence means. If you return a product that you bought in the summer, and now it's winter, chances of you reselling a t-shirt in the winter is low. So is the system smart enough to tell you, is that product beyond economical return, as an example? That's one area. Can it give you some level of predictive analysis on how to handle that return or routing that return to the nearest return facility so that you're saving on shipping and time, right? Those are some examples of intelligence. Second is when you receive the item. Most solutions I see on the market today are barely give you a page for returns, and they call it a portal, and that ends up becoming a lot more complex, right? So when you receive the items, is it the same system that allows you to receive, inspect, and grade the items? And can it actually increase the number of units you can process? Because increasing that time, you've seen labor shortages, you've seen all of those challenges, right? The system should be fast enough to process those returns very quickly and efficiently and determine the right disposition. Should it go back to stock? Should it go back to scrap? Should it be a recycle program? Those are all very real things, and they add labor and cost. So that's productivity. The third is quality. Are you able to generate great quality from an experience perspective to the customer? And keeping that customer engaged. It's not just, hey, just send it back. Can I incent the customer to find different ways of monetizing that experience with active ads, or selling them something else, or giving them a coupon? There's lots of different ways to keep the customer engaged versus, here's the credit, see you later, right? So that's a big aspect. And also learning from the returns. That's a great feedback loop to your manufacturing, saying, hey, I'm getting these shirts back because the zipper is failing. That is creating most of my return reasons. Do we have a great feedback loop to fix that? Or I'm getting a lot of returns because everyone says the size, even though I bought a medium, the size is actually a small. Well, the way I'm sizing it from a manufacturing standpoint should be readjusted, right? So those are really real examples on quality. The fourth aspect is cost. Do I have the right labor resources at the right time? With with a good RMS system, you can plan your labor because you have visibility into when the product is coming back, where is it coming back from, or what type of product is coming back. So you have the ability to maximize your cost, right? And lastly, efficiency. Can I process those returns efficiently? Can I optimize my facilities? Can I optimize my routes when the product is coming back, right? So if you look at those 5 key areas, and I'll repeat them, essentially intelligence, productivity, quality, cost, and efficiency, right? Those are the 5 key levers that you want to look at when you think a returns management solution. Today, the problem is there are some, and which is great, the market is starting to evolve and people have started to actually look for these things. But a lot of the technologies that are there today are point solutions. And they will try to improve one area, but they'll create challenges across 6 other areas, right? So in my mind, looking at it holistically is the key to really improving your returns.
So I love those attributes that you talked about. I mean, it struck me that there's at a very high level, there's the kind of the what every software solution does, right? It would try to execute a process as efficiently as possible. But then there's also, I think, the other aspect of this is the business intelligence and analytics component to it, which you kind of touched upon in some of these, examples, because there's so much data that you're collecting and so much information that you're collecting back from the customer, back from the nature of these returns that can add significant value back to the organization, whether it's back to manufacturing, back to design, back to marketing and sales. So that, like in so many other aspects of the supply chain, there's so much value in the data and information. And, I think it's important to think about how does that data, number one, are you able to capture that wealth of data? Number two, are you actually able to leverage that data across these, different avenues and across the organization? I think that's what provides yet, an additional layer of value than just the nuts and bolts of, hey, receiving a return good, minimizing the labor associated with disposition and so forth. That's all important and that's all critical aspect of this. But I think the part that's that companies ought to be thinking about is also the data and the information and the analytics and how to leverage that to drive even more value out of these solutions. So, we touched upon a little bit at the beginning of the conversation, about the pandemic, right? And the impact that's had, particularly on e-commerce. And the pandemic has certainly served as a catalyst for digital transformation across many, supply chain processes. And it sounds like it's happening here on the reverse and returns management side as well. I mean, how do you see it continuing to transform returns management moving forward?
Oh, that's a great question. So certainly massive impact on returns behavior in general with the pandemic, but I see that behavior to stick and continue to stay beyond pandemic, just because people have realized, the way we shop has changed. The convenience has kind of drilled in and become more mainstream, and it has also become very global. It's not just a US thing or a European thing, but globally that behavior has changed. So I see returns continue to be a thing and continue to be a higher percent. And in my mind, the best way for you to learn how your product is actually performing is if you're able to get the right data and analytics back from your returns. That really tells you how does the customer really feel. And being able to make micro adjustments on the product, on the process, all stems from the returns, right? The other aspect is returns affects a lot of different personas in an organization. It's not just the supply chain. Supply chain is a VP of supply chain, as an example, is one persona, and he's got a lens on productivity and how do I, process the returns quickly. You've got e-commerce that is looking at customer behavior and customer experience. You've got manufacturing that's looking at return insights. You've got the CFO that's looking at, am I getting stuck with contra credit, B2B returns, right? So those are all very interesting personas that a true returns management system needs to look at. So you need to be able to furnish not just B2C returns, B2B returns is another aspect. Omni-channel returns, you buy, install, you return, buy online, return to store. Customer communication that goes out so that you're not getting those Wismo calls, right? Where's my order kind of deal. So within an organization, there are so many different functional areas that get impacted by returns. And instead of it being a siloed approach where you're talking to the VP of e-commerce and he's simply looking at, I just want a great portal to return. That's great, but that's not really giving you maximum value. It's just giving you a portal, and that's starting to get fairly commoditized. I need a system and a platform. You tied back to the CFO where he's saying, hey, how do I incorporate that into all the returns volume I'm getting omni-channel today? I'm not just getting online, I'm getting different channels of returns, right? A lot of our customers are also doing B2B returns. How do we manage those? Contra credit is a really big thing. One of our customers was telling us that they were getting millions of units just coming back, and when they would sell back to the channel will just take that price away because they say, well, we returned this product. And they're like, well, I've never seen it. I've got products sitting here, which is not even my product. These are real things, right? They're also increasing the value of some of the higher value products. For example, if you're looking at consumer electronics, it's not just simple returns processing. You're looking at repairs on those, right? A lot of our customers have started to improve that by offering DIY kits to customers. So, there's a lot of strategies that you can put into place where it can go above and beyond, hey, get a label or get a QR code and ship it back to me and I'll give you credit. That's kind of a little bit old school in the thought process in my mind now, with so much innovation and technology out there. Looking at it holistically, being able to capture multiple streams of returns, B2B, B2C, offering value-added services on your returns, repairs, DIY kits, depending on the type of product, and also global returns. Is it multilingual? Can you calculate things like VAT tax calculations, cross-border documentations, right? So those all become very, very unique. And for most brands, what you're selling today could be slightly different than what you're going to sell 6 months from now. Do you have a system that can quickly incorporate a new workflow, a new policy? You may have a different return policy for something that's, release a fancy new item that, you're only offering a 15-day return policy to something that's fairly commoditized. You have a 90-day return policy. Does your system automatically adjust to that, right? So those all become very real factors, and they can be actually addressed fairly simplistically if you have an end-to-end platform. And I think where companies are struggling, they've done a good job in identifying the problem. Now they're struggling with, well, how do I get a full platform? And I think that's one pitfall that companies, I'm seeing a lot of e-commerce brands just not realizing this beyond just a portal. You need an end-to-end platform.
It sounds to me that, the first step really is for companies to take a step back and think about this, as you said, from a very holistic and cross-functional and cross-process, standpoint, because that is then going to better inform them in terms of what capabilities they're going to need from a technology standpoint, right? So if their strategy to what your point is to say, oh, all we need is just a way on our website to have a portal for people to send stuff back, we'll give them a QR code and print a label. Well, that's a very siloed, very myopic view of what actually happens, in the returns process. But if you really bring in all the different stakeholders that are involved, like you mentioned them all before, and really see all the different touch points that returns impacts, both negatively and positively, I think so that would help them put together. The first step should be to put together a very broad and cross-functional strategy around, returns management and reverse process. And then that will help them inform, what they need from a technology standpoint. And to your point, obviously, is that, something when a technology platform that has also taken that broad perspective, and RMS, would be, the best aligned with that kind of, strategy. So that being the first step, then as a way to wrap up and maybe summarize, what questions then should companies ask themselves to assess where they are today, right? Whether they're a leader or a laggard when it comes to, returns management.
I think the two big questions most companies should ask them just to assess where they are on leader versus laggard is, number one, have they been able to capture or at least understand what is the loss that they're generating from returns today? And that's something they can quite easily look at the data and say, well, I'm actually losing a lot of money. So the loss from returns, where is it coming from? That would be one question. Number two, have they been able to streamline not just the customer experience on the front end, but the returns experience when the item is received? How is that going? What's the processing time for returns? How long does it take for them to move the product back and get it to the right disposition? So those would be the first two metrics that I look at for a company to think about returns. And lastly, in my mind, the biggest question, which is a very straightforward answer, is what tool or system are you using for returns? If the answer is I am not, then you're already a laggard.
That's right. Yeah. Or if we've got 10 Excel spreadsheets that we're using, then that's a clear sign. And I think the sad reality is that is the response of many companies out there, is that we're not using a tool, or we're using, all we have is a portal, to your point. And that's the state of the technology that they have. Well, Gaurav, we could easily talk for an hour more on this topic. And like I said at the beginning, we're heading into the peak holiday season here, although it's been peak season, for the past year and a half with, the shift into, the surge in e-commerce here over the past year. But again, and this is one of those, if companies have forgotten how painful returns management are, they're going to get reminded very quickly here over the next few weeks and months. So it's a very timely and important conversation. So I appreciate you making the time to be with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Great. I want to thank those of you that joined us. If you're watching this episode on demand, either at the ReverseLogix website or on Talking Logistics, and you've got a question or comment for Gaurav, you can post it there, and I'm sure he'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.